This work of fiction is intended for mature audiences. It contains themes of psychological horror and violence presented in a restrained manner. All characters and events are entirely fictional. The narrative is not intended to glorify or encourage harmful behavior.
I never thought the President of the United States would haunt my dreams, but here I am, unable to escape the specter of Donald J. Trump. It started with the faintest echoes of his past, a cacophony of brash bravado, shady deals, and outright lies. In the cold light of reality, Trump's business empire had always been a mirage, built on the shifting sands of exaggeration and audacity. But in my nightmares, it became something much darker, something alive. It's no secret that Trump's rise to prominence as a businessman was paved with controversy. The bankruptcies, the lawsuits, the allegations of fraud, they read like entries in a sinister playbook. His early years as a real estate mogul were marked by lawsuits for racial discrimination in housing, violations of fair labor laws, and rumors of connections to unsavory figures. His university promised wealth, but left students drowning in debt. These were facts documented and undeniable, yet he wore them like badges of honor. The more he was accused, the louder he cried about his innocence and success. But in my nightmares, the truth of these events twists and warps, becoming something otherworldly. I see him in the shadowy corridors of Trump Tower, where the walls seem to pulse with a life of their own. They whisper the broken promises of failed ventures like Trump Steaks, Trump Airlines, and Trump Vodka. Behind each gilded door there are ghosts, a men or women ruined by his schemes. Their eyes burn with accusation, their hands clawing at the golden veneer of his empire. They would devour him, if only they could. One night, I found myself trapped in a vision of his infamous casino in Atlantic City, a monument to excess and impending doom. The chandeliers dripped with blood-red light, casting long, dancing, vile shadows. The slot machines screamed in agony, coins spilling onto the floor like molten gold. From the distance came the hollow laughter of Trump himself, echoing through the corridors. It was the laugh of a man who had gambled with other people's lives and money and always came out ahead. Then came the lies, not just the garden variety fibs, but the blatant falsehoods he wielded like weapons. "It's the most successful casino ever," his voice would boom, even as bankruptcy loomed. "I'm worth billions," he'd insist, while his tax returns suggested otherwise. These lies formed the bricks of a dark tower in my dreams, a towering monolith that loomed over a desolate city. At its base was a churning sea of despair, the voices of contractors unpaid for their work, investors duped by false promises, and workers laid off without warning or pay. But the most horrifying part of this nightmare wasn't the past. It was the way his darkness seemed to grow stronger with every transgression. Each lie, each fraud, each crime was like a ritual sacrifice, feeding something ancient and insatiable. The Trump of my nightmares wasn't just a man. He was a creature born of greed, arrogance, and unchecked power, a grotesque amalgamation of ambition and malice. And as his power grew, so did his hunger for control. In the final moments of this chapter of horror, I saw the monstrous Trump standing atop his golden tower, his silhouette illuminated by lightning. Below him, the masses screamed in terror as his shadow engulfed them. "Believe me," he thundered, his voice reverberating like a demonic incantation. "Don't believe your own eyes and ears," Trump continued. And they did, despite the devastation all around them. I woke up in a cold sweat, heart pounding. I knew the horrors I had witnessed were fictional, the stuff of nightmares. But the seeds of those nightmares had been planted in the very real, very troubling events of Trump's rise to power. And as the first rays of dawn crept into my room, I couldn't help but wonder how much of this nightmare was truly fiction and how much of it was the dark truth many refused to see. If his business dealings were a source of horror, Trump's personal life was no less grotesque. The tales of his affairs, his betrayals, and his treatment of women painted a picture of a man who saw girls and women not as people, but as objects for his gratification. His own words caught on tape revealed a chilling philosophy. When you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. It was no secret that Trump had paid hush money to a porn star and a Playboy model, silencing them as he pursued the presidency. Reports claim these payments were made while his wife, Melania, was pregnant with their son. The transactional nature of his relationships with women seemed to mirror his approach to business. Everything had a price, and he was willing to pay it as long as it served his end game. But in my nightmares, these affairs took on a more sinister tone. I saw him stalking through gilded hallways, his gaze predatory. The women in his path were frozen, their faces a mix of fear and disgust. They knew they had no choice. His wealth and power made resistance futile. In the dream, Trump's shadow stretched impossibly long, swallowing everything in its path. It wasn't just the women who were consumed, but their very identities, their humanity stripped away until they were nothing more than lifeless dolls, to play with as he pleased. In one particularly haunting vision, I found myself in the penthouse of Trump Tower. The room was filled with mirrors, each one reflecting not reality, but twisted distortions of the truth. I saw women crying, their voices muffled as if they were trapped behind the glass. Trump moved among them like he did at his beauty pageants, pulling strings that weren't visible, but clearly he was in control. His laughter echoed in my mind, a chilling sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The most horrifying part was the sense of complicity. In the dream, I was not just an observer, but a participant. I felt the weight of my silence, the guilt of witnessing and yet doing nothing, remaining silent, even though I wanted to lash out. I saw his enablers, the lawyers and fixers who smoothed over his immoral indiscretions, the media figures who treated his actions as mere playful, harmless gossip, and the voters who dismissed his behavior as locker room talk and boys just being boys. All who watched yet remained silent when we knew this was unethical, immoral, and un-American. We were all part of the machine that allowed him to thrive, to rise to power in our deafening silence. When I woke, I felt sick to my stomach. The nightmare had been fictional, but the seeds of it were real. Trump's treatment of women, his entitlement, and his disregard for basic human decency were well documented. The horror wasn't just that he had done these things, but that so many had looked the other way, which allowed him to continue unabated, unchallenged. And as I stared at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder how many more stories were out there, hidden behind non-disclosure agreements and walls of silence. How many more nightmares had been carried out that were born of his unholy actions, their victims left to suffer in the shadows, too afraid, too beat down to fight back? The 2020 election should have been the end of Trump's grip on power. Defeated by Joe Biden, his loss was a decisive rebuke. But for Trump, it wasn't just an electoral defeat. It was an existential one, a fracture to his superego. The man who had built his identity on the illusion of perpetual victory found himself staring into the abyss of his own failure, and the abyss stared back and laughed. The lies began immediately, each one more absurd than the last. "I won by a landslide," he declared, even as the votes showed otherwise. "The election was rigged," he shouted, unleashing an unrelenting torrent of conspiracy theories. In my nightmares, these lies took on a monstrous form, swirling together into a black storm that consumed reality itself. facts twisted and shattered as the storm raged, leaving behind a desolate wasteland where truth and science no longer mattered. Trump's fury over his loss became a contagion, infecting his followers with a toxic blend of rage and paranoia. The KKK, white supremacists, and other hate groups rallied to his side, emboldened by his refusal to condemn them, to condemn racism in any form. In my dreams, they were an army of shadows, their faces obscured, but their hatred palpable. They marched in lockstep, their chants of "Jews will not replace us" vown a chilling hymn to a leader who thrived on division, hatred, and fear. I saw Trump in these nightmares, sitting in a darkened bathroom, his face illuminated by the glow of endless television screens in every room. Each screen showed a distorted image of Biden's inauguration, replaying in an endless loop. His screams echoed through the chamber, a guttural sound of rage, denial, and disbelief. He clawed at the screens, his fingernails leaving bloody streaks, but the images wouldn't change. Biden's face loomed larger and larger until it filled the room, and Trump's screams turned to sobs. "I am a loser, and now everyone knows it." But it wasn't just his despair that haunted me. It was the way his madness seeped into the world. His lies became weapons, wielded by his followers to attack anyone who opposed him. The insurrection on January 6th was the culmination of this madness, a fever of baseless, endless lies made real. In my nightmares, I saw the Capitol not as a beacon of democracy, but as a fortress under siege. The rioters were not human, but grotesque creatures, their faces twisted into snarls of hatred. They carried Trump's banner and Old Glory like a dark vigil against democracy, their violence a tribute to their fallen king. I still get chills from their chants of "Hang Mike Pence" as Trump sat silently in the Oval Office for hours. Trump himself became a phantom in these dreams, a shadow that loomed over the chaos. He whispered to his followers from the darkness, his voice dripping with venom. "They're stealing your country," he hissed. "Rise up, fight for me. I will make America great again." And they did. Their loyalty to him, stronger than their allegiance to the flag, the truth, to justice, and even to God himself. When I woke from these nightmares, I felt a deep, dark unease that lingered long after. The horrors I had seen were fictional, yet they were rooted in the very real events of Trump's post-election descent. His narcissism, his calls to Georgia state officials to find him 1,780 votes, his lies, his embrace and allegiance to hate groups, these were all documented, undeniable. The nightmare wasn't just that he had lost, but that his loss had unleashed something far darker, a movement fueled by resentment, anger, and the refusal to accept reality and provable facts. And as I stared into the morning light, I couldn't shake the feeling that the nightmare that is Trump was far from over. If Trump's business dealings and election defeat revealed the darker facets of his character, or lack thereof, his views on women brought those shadows to a new level of horror. His comments about Kamala Harris, Joe Biden's running mate, and the first female vice president of color were venomous. He demeaned her intelligence, questioned her qualifications, and mocked her heritage. In one rally, he sneered, "Can you imagine her as president? She doesn't have what it takes." These words, rooted in sexism and racism, echoed in my nightmares. In the dream, Harris stood in the Oval Office, but her every move was shadowed by Trump's specter. His voice filled the room, a cruel whisper of doubt and derision that seemed to drain the light from the space. Around her, the walls began to close in, trapping her under the weight of centuries of prejudice, misogyny, and inequality that women continue to face even today. But Trump's most horrifying legacy was the overturning of Roe v. Wade, a decision that stripped millions of women of their right to choose. In my nightmare, this act became a dystopian stab against humanity's life-givers, women, Girls were hunted, their bodies no longer their own, but property of the state. Dark vans patrolled the streets, snatching anyone suspected of seeking an abortion. In secret, young women organized resistance groups, their meetings held in candlelit basements in dark, unlit rooms. They whispered their plans to one another, their voices shaking but resolute. "We will not go back," they promised. The resistance grew, and so did the danger. In one vivid dream, I saw a young woman named Elena standing before a crowd of women and girls, her voice trembling but powerful. "We are more than vessels," she declared. "We will not be silenced."
And empowered to end the
Her
lie,
words
and
ignited a
empowered to
spark
end the
in the
lie,
crowd,
and empowered
their
to end the
faces
lie,
alight
and
with
empowered to.
defiance. But as they cheered, the darkness loomed closer. The vans, the patrols, the enforcers, they were always just a step behind and empowered to end the lives of these women in favor of the unborn. The insanity of their philosophy was baffling and hideously inhuman. In another vision, I saw the ruins of a clinic where women had once sought care. The building was charred, burnt, and abandoned, the windows shattered. Inside, the walls were covered with messages scrawled in ash and blood. "Our bodies, our choice, we will rise again. Our freedom is not yours to take." These words pulsed with a life of their own, a testament to the unyielding spirit of those who refuse to be oppressed and belittled simply because of their anatomy and what they did not have between their legs. Through it all, Trump's shadow loomed, carefully feeding on the chaos he had wantedly created. In my dreams, he sat on a throne made of broken laws and shattered dreams, his laughter echoing through the desolation of women's rights. But even as he reveled in his power, the resistance grew stronger. The young women who had been silenced found their voices, their courage, their strength, their will to stand up and fight. They became a force that could not be ignored and would fight until their rights were restored. When I woke, I felt a strange mix of fear and hope. The nightmare had been vivid, but it was rooted in real events. Trump's comments, his actions, his legacy of division and control. Yet the resistance, though fictional in my dream, felt just as real. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times there is light to be found in those who refuse to give up. And as I stared into the morning light, I knew the fight was far from over, but so was the unbreakable hope. Hope to rise. Trump's presidency began not with a whimper, but with a thunderclap of chaos. From his first moments in office, it was clear that the man who had thrived on spectacle would continue to govern the same way. His cabinet appointments were a parade of sycophants, unqualified loyalists, and ideologues who seemed more intent on dismantling their departments than leading them. Linda McMahon, a millionaire with no experience in public education, took over the Department of Education. Lee Zeldin, a longtime ally of polluters, was placed in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency. Each pick was a piece in a larger puzzle, one that painted a picture of deliberate sabotage of the Constitution, rule of law, and the best interest of all Americans. But the horror didn't stop there. Trump's executive orders came fast and furious, each one more controversial than the last. He has suspended the refugee admissions program until such time as the further entry into the United States of refugees aligns with the interests of the United States. Continuing to see immigrants not as human beings coming here to protect their family, but as illegal aliens, the term making them seem not human. Then came his continued attempts to dismantle ICU healthcare protections, leaving millions wondering if they'd lose access to basic medical care in the coming months. Lawsuits are piling up almost as quickly as the orders themselves, each one challenging the legality of these executive actions. In my nightmares, these orders were not just words on paper, but dark spells, each one ripping apart the fabric of the great nation. I saw families separated at borders, their cries echoing in endless halls of detention centers. I saw the land itself poisoned, rivers turning black as industries were given free rein to pollute with no consequences. The air grew thick with smog, and the cities crumbled under the weight of unchecked greed and lawlessness. And then there was Ivanka. The whispers about Trump's unsettling comments regarding his daughter became louder in my nightmares, each one more grotesque than the last. "If she weren't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her," he had once said, a statement that sent shivers down my spine. In my nightmares, this fascination became something monstrous. I saw Trump seated on a throne of gold, his gaze fixated on Ivanka as if she were an idol to be worshipped, his own personal Barbie. She stood frozen, a doll-like figure dressed in white, her face devoid of emotion. Around them the world burned, but his focus never wavered. He desired her in the biblical sense. It was horrid and a perverse act of a sick individual. The true horror, though, was the way the nation seemed to normalize it all. The media covered his every move, each headline feeding his insatiable ego. His supporters, blinded by loyalty, dismissed the scandals as fabrications. "He's making America great again," they chanted, even as the foundations of democracy cracked beneath their feet, and the red states would soon realize his true intentions: to make himself even richer, as well as those who bought him the presidency, like Timothy Mellon and Elon Musk. These red states will soon learn that they have been lied to and used in order for the rich to become even more powerful and unstoppable. In the final moments of this sickening dream, I saw a vision of the future, a nation unrecognizable, its people divided and desperate and on the brink of another civil war. The streets were filled with protests, but the air was heavy with despair, and above it all, Trump's face loomed, a grotesque caricature of unchecked, uncontrollable power. His voice echoed through the chaos: "Only I can fix it. Only I can save our way of life." When I woke, the weight of the nightmare lingered. Trump's presidency will become a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when power is handed to those who seek only to wield it, to further pad their bank accounts and enhance their life. It was a warning that democracy is fragile, a delicate balance that can be upended by lies, greed, and apathy. And as I stared into the morning light, I knew one thing for certain: the fight to protect our nation was far from over. If we wanted to preserve the ideals of freedom and justice, we would have to stand against this new threat. We would have to fight back and do whatever it takes to preserve our freedom and our democracy against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Hello, my Nightmare Obsession fans. We hope you loved this story, and were almost frightened to death, left wanting even more. If so, please share video and our channel link with friends and family, and ask them to subscribe, like, comment, and share with their friends and family too. We really want to create more nightmarish horror stories for you, so please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel now. We would really appreciate it. Thanks so much.